They say Sparta feared nothing, no empire, no army, no god. But the truth is far darker. The only thing that terrified a Spartan was extinction. And in their ruthless quest to survive, they carved a custom so brutal, so intimate, so violating, that even ancient historians whispered about it in disgust. When a Spartan man fell in battle, his wife did not simply mourn, she became part of a cold political machine designed to remake life from ashes. Today, we walk into that shadow. Like this video, subscribe for more haunting history, and let's step into a world without mercy. In Sparta, a man's death in war was never truly his own, it rippled violently through the life of the woman he left behind. A Spartan wife might hear the bronze shields returning before she saw the faces, and with one missing step among the ranks, she understood that her fate was about to change forever. Her grief was swallowed by a state that cared nothing for love. She was no longer a widow, she was a vessel of obligation, a symbol of duty, a reminder that Spartan strength depended on women's bodies as much as men's spears. For in Sparta, the greatest crime was not losing a battle, it was failing to produce warriors. And so, when a husband died, the woman he left behind could be assigned, commanded, or coerced into bearing children with another Spartan, often chosen not for affection but for physical excellence. Some historians describe these matches as ritualized breeding arrangements, framed as noble but experienced as deeply invasive. Others insist the practice was softened by mutual consent. Yet within the whispers of ancient writers lies the darker truth: a woman's grief was secondary to the city's hunger for perfect sons. The nights following a warrior's death could feel like an inescapable ritual. A widow might be approached by an elder, not with condolences but with instructions, cold, pragmatic, stripped of emotion. Spartan society believed that children born of strong stock would honor the fallen and preserve the lineage. But for the women forced into these arrangements, the practice blurred the line between duty and violation. She could not refuse without bringing shame upon her husband's name, her family, and herself. The city-state demanded obedience, and in the quiet darkness of her home, she bore its weight alone. To understand why Sparta enforced such harsh customs, we must look at the brutal truth of its survival. Spartans were few, shockingly few. Some estimates suggest that, at their peak, there were only a few thousand full Spartan citizens, constantly threatened by enemies and outnumbered by their own enslaved population, the Helots. Every death on the battlefield was a catastrophe. Every wound became a strategic asset. Offspring were not just children, they were future shields, future soldiers, future guardians of the state. And in this relentless calculation, Spartan women became both revered and exploited, honored and controlled. Spartan marriage itself was nothing like the gentle ceremonies sung by poets of other Greek cities. A bride's wedding night was ritualized, abrupt, and steeped in symbolism. She was often seized, shorn like a warrior, dressed in men's clothing, and left in darkness until her new husband came for her. This was meant to mirror the shock of battle, the forging of unity through discipline. But after his death, traditions shifted into something colder, her body became a battlefield of expectation. Her marriage was over, yet her service to the state had only begun. What made these customs even more haunting was the emotional whiplash they inflicted. A widow was expected to mourn with dignity, never openly weep, never collapse into raw sorrow. Spartan culture despised displays of weakness. She was to stand upright, proud, unbroken, even as the state prepared to use her future to replace the man she had just lost. Her grief became a silent, private shadow, while public expectations pressed on her shoulders like a shield she could not set down. Ancient writers described these women as stoic, but stoicism born of coercion is still a wound. Some widows accepted their fate with resigned obedience, believing they were preserving their husband's legacy by allowing another man to father her children. Others endured it as a quiet horror. And while Spartan leaders framed these customs as patriotic and noble, the emotional cost was immeasurable. The widow's household changed, her identity shifted, and her autonomy evaporated. She learned quickly that personal feelings had no place in a society built entirely on discipline and war. Love was irrelevant. Desire was unnecessary. Only duty mattered. And duty, in Sparta, was merciless. Even the process of assigning partners was dehumanizing. Elders, council members, or sometimes even the husband before death could choose the man who would continue the line. Spartan procreation operated like a grim state program, pairing individuals with the sole aim of producing physically superior children. These arrangements were whispered about in other Greek cities with a mix of awe and repulsion. To outsiders, Sparta appeared strong. To the widows forced to participate, the city's strength was built on their silent suffering. Their bodies became monuments to a war machine that was never satisfied. And yet, within this iron system, women possessed a strange, paradoxical power. Spartan women owned property, commanded households, and voiced opinions more freely than other Greek wives. But this autonomy was conditional, granted only because the men spent their lives in barracks, training for war. Beneath the surface, every privilege they held was shadowed by the expectation that their most sacred role was to produce warriors. A mother of sons was honored. A wife without children was pitted or pressured. A widow of a fallen soldier became an instrument of state survival, whether she wished it or not. The legend of Spartan strength often glosses over these darker truths. We hear of the phalanx, the iron discipline, the valor of Thermopylae. But behind every spear stood a woman whose life was shaped by systems she did not choose. Every Spartan victory was paid for not only in blood but in the autonomy of its women. When a warrior fell, the echo of his death resounded through the life of his wife, who bore the burden of recreating what had been lost. For her, grief was not an ending, it was the beginning of another obligation. Some historians argue that Spartan widows occasionally found affection in these new unions, forming unconventional but consensual family structures. Others believe the practice bordered on sanctioned violation, wrapped in patriotic rhetoric. The truth likely lies somewhere in the shadows, a mix of obedience, fear, duty, and occasional acceptance. What remains undeniable is that Spartan society valued the continuation of the warrior class above the emotional well-being of its women. And so, the stories of these widows drift through history like unspoken laments, overshadowed by the glorified tales of their husbands' heroism. Even children born from these arrangements were absorbed into the Spartan system immediately. Boys were inspected at birth, and if found strong, were raised to become warriors. Weakness meant abandonment. Girls, though spared the warriors' training, were still considered assets for future alliances and future reproduction. A widow might cradle her newborn only to be reminded that he belonged to Sparta, not to her. The grief of losing a husband mixed with the fear of losing a child to the state's brutal expectations. Motherhood offered pride, but also terror. As centuries passed, Sparta's numbers dwindled, its power collapsed, and its fierce traditions dissolved into history. But the stories of its women remain haunting reminders that strength often hides cruelty, and heroism may demand sacrifices that never make it into the heroic songs. The widows of Sparta survived wars that were fought both on the battlefield and within their homes. Their resilience, forged in silence, stands as a testament to the human cost of a society that worshipped endurance above compassion. They lived in a world where sorrow was a duty, and survival was an order. And so, when we speak of Sparta, we must remember not only the shields and spears but the women whose lives were reshaped by loss, commanded by the state, and written into history's margins. Their suffering is a chapter often left unread, yet it tells us more about Sparta's soul than any tale of glory. If this story moved you, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more powerful historical breakdowns, and leave a comment telling us which forgotten story we should uncover next. Your engagement keeps this channel alive, and I'll see you in the next video.